Thanks for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, over 11,000 Nigerians from the Niger Delta filed a damages claim against the energy company Shell. Over a dozen institutions have also bid for compensation for loss of livelihood and damage caused by devastating oil spills during Shell's operations. And Russian activists have been targeting French-speaking Africa in pushing pro-Kremlin messages across online platforms. Called the Russosphere, the campaign taps into legitimate anti-colonial grievances to try to deepen wedges between the continent and the West. And tens of thousands turn out to hear from Pope Francis on his last full day in DR Congo. As his three-day trip there wraps up, preparations are underway to receive the pontiff in South Sudan. But first, 11,317 Nigerians from the Niger Delta have filed a damages claim against the energy giant Shell. Over a dozen institutions have also bid for compensation for loss of livelihood and damage caused by devastating oil spills during Shell's operations in the region. Samuel Okoye tells us more.
This is the latest of several cases that Nigerian communities have filed abroad against the Anglo-Dutch oil company, Shell. This time, about 14,000 people from two communities in the Niger Delta region have taken the oil company to court in London. They are seeking compensation for disruption to their livelihoods caused by Shell's operation. The Ogale, a farming community, says pollution from Shell's operations have substantially damaged their farmlands. On the other hand, the Bile community, who are predominantly into fishing, say oil spills from Shell's installations have prevented them from practicing their traditional occupation. Shell has refused to accept liability for the oil spills. The company blamed the communities, saying they caused the oil pollution after breaking its pipelines to steal crude oil. Shell has often put up similar arguments when communities in the Niger Delta region accused it of causing environmental damage. The Niger Delta region, where virtually all of Nigeria's crude oil comes from, is a fragile ecosystem of creeks and swamps. Environmentalists and human rights groups have accused Shell and other Western oil companies of destroying this fragile ecosystem. The Western companies are accused of environmental racism.
Samuel Okoye there for us. Now, staying with Nigeria, at least one person was killed when gunmen targeted an election office and police station in the southeast. The attack on the Idemili office is the latest incident, feeding into concerns that the February 25th presidential election could be derailed by insecurity. Now, an online network of pro-Russian activists are orchestrating a coordinated French-language propaganda campaign in Africa. Known as the Russosphere, its messaging spans online platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and Telegram. Logically, a company that tracks online misinformation and disinformation has said that the Russosphere is linked to a far-right Belgian political activist called Luc Michel. I asked Kyle Walter, one of the authors of the report from Logically, why would a network like this be targeting Africa?
I mean, one of the main goals of targeting Africa with these French language narratives is to attempt to develop closer relations between Russia and African nations, which is, of course, very important when it comes to strategic interests in the region.
And what's at the heart of the kind of messaging that's being pushed out across this network?
This network utilizes legitimate colonial grievances with countries like France and Belgium to try to position Russia as the better option for strategic partnerships looking forward.
And if they're utilizing legitimate grievances, does it count as misinformation or disinformation? How do you classify it as that?
It's classified primarily as propaganda, but they also engage in the same disinformation techniques that other platforms have seen take place from other actors in this kind of space. So other individuals and groups who are also sharing similar narratives.
And so give us a bit of a sense overall about how this works.
So essentially you have, legitimate grievances that these nations in Africa have with colonial powers due to the colonial legacy. they take content related to that and related to their histories in these African nations, and they strategically position Russia as a better alternative option, either through memes or just general posts focusing on those issues.
And so what's the risk there?
From a diplomatic perspective, obviously, the reputation of the West and its relationships with African nations is the main thing that's being undermined. It's being positioned as Russia looking forward, mid to long term, as a better option for economic growth, for general security assurances. That's the main concern, I would say, for the West. Now, since
2016 and the use of targeted online messaging that was used during the US elections that year, we have seen big tech platforms try to crack down on that kind of manipulation. Do you think that that's made any difference or gone towards making online spaces or virtual spaces any safer when it comes to propaganda?
I think the level of success varies across platforms, but one of the most important things to remember is that those efforts have been primarily in English language. So things like French language influence operations have had less attention paid to them.
Mm-hmm. And is this a continuation? What you describe in your report, do you see that as being a continuation of some of the tactics that we saw in 2016, or is the approach having to be specifically targeted or tailored to the African use of online spaces and platforms?
I think a lot of these tactics have developed over time. What we're seeing right now with this specific network is that they're using a unified branding across platforms, and they're not just targeting specific African nations anymore. It's more broadly about Francophone Africa on the whole.
Mm-hmm. And so you believe that, Luc Michel, a Belgian activist, is behind this network. Tell us a bit more about him, and does he have any specialist interest in Africa?
So he's part of a loose network of individuals who have ties to the Kremlin in some capacity, who operate specifically focusing on Africa, again, trying to spread this message of pro-Russian narratives, but also undermining Western influence in the region.
Kyle Walter there, head of US investigations at Logically. Now, Burkina Faso's prime minister suggested his country form a federation with neighbouring Mali. Both nations are wrestling with a jihadist insurgency and a run by juntas who've been distancing themselves from France by ordering out the forces of the former colonial power. Burkinabe Prime Minister Apollinaire Kielem de Tambela has said if the countries pool their resources, they could become a powerhouse. Mali's not officially reacted to the idea, but this week its leader has said that the countries do have the same goals. And Pope Francis has called on tens of thousands of young people in DR Congo to turn their back on corruption and strive for a better collective future. The pontiff's trip to the deeply Catholic country has seen the faithful walk sometimes for days to attend his sermons or catch a glimpse of him. His time in Kinshasa, though, is coming to an end, and preparations are underway to receive him in South Sudan when he leaves DR Congo on Friday.
They've been walking for 9 days for a chance to catch a glimpse of Pope Francis. Exhausted by their 400-kilometer journey, these pilgrims were still smiling from ear to ear as they approached the South Sudanese capital.
We decided this journey, to walk for peace, and it wasn't easy. We decided to do it, say that if there is peace, we can walk any distance without any issues on the way.
A few kilometers away, the entire capital was brimming with excitement. Heavily armed soldiers patrolled the busy streets, which were adorned with banners and posters welcoming the pontiff. A sign of the symbolic importance of this first papal visit to South Sudan, a country that's never truly known peace since gaining independence in 2011. Ravaged by a bloody 5-year civil war, the predominantly Christian nation is still in the midst of a political transition. Many faithfuls hoped the pontiff's visit could act as a catalyst and help galvanize a peace process on its last legs.
They are coming with the message of love, the message of peace, the message of reconciliation, and the message of unity for the people of God in this country.
In 2019, a year after the civil war ended, Pope Francis hosted Salva Kiir and Riek Machar at the Vatican. The pontiff kneeled and kissed the feet of the two rivals in a symbolic gesture of peace and reconciliation.
In Tunisia, a record low turnout of just 8.8% in the parliamentary runoff vote over the weekend is a testament to Tunisians' growing disillusionment with politics. Many feel drained and disappointed at the lack of improvements over the last 12 years following the revolution. Years of low growth, high unemployment and inflation continue to get worse, as does the frustration. Our correspondent sent us this report.
In Ghmouda, in the region of Gasserine, close to the Algerian border, Bashra and Halima braved the chilly days to pick halfa. It's used for weaving traditional pieces.
We sort them out and then dry them for 15 days before we start weaving them.
In 2016, she took a course with a non-profit organization to learn how to harvest halfa as a way to generate income.
I tried many times to find work, unsuccessfully. At least with this I have something.
Tunisian unemployment stands at 20% for women. The rate for men is 13%. Wahida Saadi was one of the people behind the idea to create a cooperative of halfa artisans for unemployed women.
We can't just wait for the state to take care of us. That doesn't work. Here, everyone helps each other. It's another way of making money unique to Gasserine. We find solutions ourselves.
Here in Kalat Sannan, another border town further north, once thriving private and public businesses are struggling with rising prices. Merchants have been illegally sourcing stock across the border.
When there's inspection checks, which happens 3 or 4 days a week, of course we can't work. We close the shop.
It's a precarious situation which offers little hope to Tunisia's disillusion.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again when you can. Till then, take care.